Hello, in this video I'd like to talk about the basic container properties in CSS Grid. So here we have our starting file. On the HTML side we have a section, a div within that, and then 3 div items. And then over in our CSS we have a reset, a section wrapper, which basically just moves everything down and gives a little margin on the side. Then we have a container, and the container has a new CSS property called aspect ratio. And so basically this is taking the width of its parent container and making it into a square, and it stays a square as we resize the window. I have a background border on both the container and the interior items to see what's happening. So the first thing we're going to do is display grid. Unlike Flexbox, when you do display grid, nothing happens. For something to happen, we have to define our columns and or our rows. So we'll say grid template columns, 100 pixels, 100 pixels, 100 pixels, pixels, 100 pixels, 100 pixels, and start. And there we go. And so there's 5 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each number you put in puts in a new column of 100 pixels. Now, right now we're in our live view in VS Code, but to really see what's happening in Grid and to be able to work with it, we need to use the developer tools in either Firefox or Chrome. So I'm actually going to use Firefox. I like it a little bit better, and we can take that same URL and stick it in here. And then I'm going to go over here, delete that, and go like this. And then I will right click, inspect, click on that. And if we find, let's put this a little bigger for a second. If we find our grid, we can turn that on, and now we can see actually what's happening here. So column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5. Okay, so the first thing is we can control the number of columns based on how many slots we specify. We can also do the same thing with rows. So if I say grid template rows, and I do 100 pixels by 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and go over here. Now that's our columns and our rows. Another thing is it doesn't have to be pixels. So we haven't really talked about units yet, but you can use other units in here. So for example, you can do rems, so 24 rem. You can do ch, which is character. You can do rems ems, and mix it with pixels, or another unit, a new unit that's super handy to grid, FRs. And what FRs are fractional units. So basically how much of the space available. So for the most part, we're going to be using pixels and fractional units, and let me show you how handy the fractional units are. So if I, instead of having 100 pixels, I can do this instead. And now I have 3 equal columns. If I want the middle column to be twice as big as the other 2 columns, I can have 2 FRs. And this is pretty similar to the grow parameter in Flexbox, but it's a little bit different. Another attribute that we have control over is the gap. So if we wanted what would be the equivalent of gutters in here, in something like InDesign or Figma, we can add the gap parameter. If you put in one number, that number controls both the column gap and the row gap. If you add 2 numbers, so let's do 3 pixels. The first number is defining the row gap, and the second number is the column gap. If we only wanted 1 column, we could delete the other 2. But typing in, let's say we want 5 equal columns, just adding FR, FR, FR a million times is kind of annoying. So there is a repeat function. First number is how many times you want to repeat, and the second number is what you want to repeat. And I think there's a comma in between the 2. I think the last thing I want to say is if I don't implicitly state the size, or I'm sorry, the height of the parent, or implicitly state any rows, the height of the grid units will be controlled by the content. They will automatically adapt to the content. So if I add some text here, now it will adapt to whatever cell has the greatest length.